Documentation for a skill assessment, specifically payslips, contracts, and tax records. Now, we're going to be talking about why the skill assessing authorities want these and why it's important for you to provide them in the correct manner and what it means to have them in the correct manner. My name is Abby from Migration Centre of Australia, and today we're going to talk about the importance of these documents. If you're applying for a skilled visa for Australia, there's a lot of visas that require you to have a skill assessment. Dealing with the skill assessment authorities is one of the most complicated parts when starting this process because they require so much thorough documentation to ensure that they can assess you correctly. So let's focus on payslips, contracts, and tax records. Many applicants assume that a reference letter or a statutory declaration that they give will be enough. That's not always the case, because if you're missing a lot of documentation, the skill assessing authority may not accept that employment period at all when assessing for your work experience. So today we're going to break down exactly what the government approved assessing authorities are looking for, and this may vary from skill assessing authorities, but what do they actually want to see when it comes to this documentation, and how can you ensure that your skill assessment is not refused? Let's start with the basics. Why are these documents so important? So payslips demonstrate that you did in fact get paid for that period. Now, depending on which country you're from, there may or may not be payslips. If that's the case, you can provide other evidence such as a bank statement to show that you got paid by this company on a regular basis when claiming for your employment, right? But if you do have payslips, they should mention the company that's paying you. They should mention which week or which month that payment relates to. It should also outline what your position is and how much you were paid and how many hours you worked during that period. Now, sometimes payslips don't mean anything because it just means, yes, I worked for this period and I got paid this much. Tax records or bank statements help back up that payslip evidence. If, for example, you got paid $1,000 for your work for 1 week, then your bank statement should also reflect that $1,000. Let's assume that $1,000 was after tax, so you would have been transferred $1,000 for your employment. And now, let's say you worked full-time over a year, your tax records that you have lodged should be able to show how much you were paid for an entire tax period. That's 1 financial year. Now, it may be also the case that you have multiple employments and it's hard to differentiate where the total income in your tax is coming from. There should be a way to break that down or justify that to ensure that you can say, from this employment, this is how much I earned, and this is evidenced here. The other income that you may have had is from these sources, and that's why the total amounts to a much larger amount versus the experience that you're claiming. It could also be the case that you work, for example, in your occupation at 2 different employers. So we need to show how much you worked each week. So for example, if there's 20 hours at one employer for one period and there's an overlapping period of 20 hours from another employer for the same period, then you can actually claim a full week of experience. So that means 40 hours of work for that particular week. And to tie this all together, you have the employment contract or the reference letter, which then says, this is the contract that I had signed with the company for my employment. These are the pay slips, and then here's the actual evidence of me getting paid for that period that's outlined in the pay slip, right? So when you combine all of that, it provides a surety to the officers assessing your skill assessment that experience that you're claiming is genuine, it is truthful, and there's evidence that cannot be fraudulent when making these claims, because you cannot just change a bank statement, but that's produced by the bank. If you're altering any kind of documents and the department does find this out, again, it can be very detrimental to your visa history in Australia, and you can be banned from Australia as well. If the evidence is missing or unclear, or you're not able to obtain it, there sometimes are ways to work around this, depending on the kind of skill assessing authority you're dealing with. Each skill assessing authority generally has different criteria, but most of them are quite strict when it comes to producing evidence. We've touched on some of these documents, but what are the other documents that you can provide to support your skill assessment? So we've talked about reference letters, organizational charts, CVs or resumes, statutory declarations, or superannuation records or similar to what it is in your country. Now, generally, you need to provide these documents to ensure you're claiming the experience, but sometimes common mistakes that people make is maybe they haven't attached all of their pay slips for the experience they're claiming. We make sure that we try to attach as much evidence as possible, although not required all the time. But if you're claiming, for example, 3 years of work experience, it might be a bit unrealistic to attach all the pay slips for those 3 years. But if we can, we will always try to do that to ensure that it is a positive outcome for your skill assessment. The next thing that you should be careful about is employment dates. Make sure they're consistent across everywhere. Make sure the employment dates match what your employment contract sign date or start date is to the claims that you're making in the reference letter as well, and as well as what you've put into your skill assessment application. The next thing is if you don't have good quality scanned documents. If it's low quality and they're unable to read it, they may or may not request you for another copy of that. If they can't read it, they may not consider that document at all. So it's really important to make sure that you have high quality documents. Make sure you back up every claim that you're making with financial evidence, and you should attach secondary documents to help strengthen the primary evidences that you've provided. So if you have any questions regarding a skill assessment, leave them below or contact us for more information.